And we're back for another fun episode here at Extreme Power Hour Podcast. Got a good friend of mine here, Josh Treasure. And what's funny about Josh's last name is Treasure. And we were talking before about this whole kind of almost conspiracy into money, greed, drug addiction, and it's almost like a vicious cycle. So that kind of led us into maybe deep diving a little bit into this money thing, like this system that everyone talks about, system, matrix, call it what you will, is about like how money works. Josh, I know you're a financial representative, and obviously this is for entertainment purposes only, and these are strictly our opinions, right? And we're just going to kind of go into, let's call it Theoryville in that conspiratorial world of the origin of money. Have you ever kind of thought about that, Josh?
I guess a little bit here and there, but not much. You get so caught up in the day to day,
right?
It's difficult to think about.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess what we call it the Western nation, the Western world that we have now has a financial system, which is called a QFS system, like a quantum financial system. So everything is quantified.
Yeah.
So, like, imagine you give a bank $100. That bank will leverage it to $1,000. So, because you gave them 100, they leverage it for 1,000, and that's how banks make money, is obviously on the interest. And then the banks kind of make the loans out of thin air, which they get that money from TARP loans from the federal government. So it's kind of like, okay, we keep saying federal. Is it actually the federal government or the Federal Reserve? Have you ever kind of thought about that?
No, a little bit. I mean, I know a little bit about the central banking system and the Federal Reserve, and it seems like it's just a mess.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess. It's as if the Federal Reserve is no more federal than they say the Federal Express. Have you ever thought about that? That actually, the Federal Reserve is not owned by the government. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, it's almost like, almost hurts, doesn't it? Think about you. Wait a second. What?
Who owns the Federal Reserve?
Well, so let's dive into the Federal Reserve. So let's first figure out, when was the Federal Reserve even established? And like I said, these are strictly opinions. But you can look up some of this fun information. So let's look up the facts, right? Federal Reserve was started December 23rd, 1913. Okay. So before the Federal Reserve was started, obviously you're going to have a group of people that are going to say, hey, you know what? We need to start a new money-backed QFS system, a quantum financial system, where they quantify it. At this point, it was actually considered a gold back. So it's got a lot more value back then than it does now, because now they just kind of quantify it out there. It's kind of like the $34 trillion that's owed national deficit, where they just keep quantifying it. So back in the system of 1913, they met on an island called Jekyll Island. Have you ever heard of that? In 1912.
No.
Right outside of Georgia, of all places, on an island. There was a group of small amount of men. And so you're thinking like, okay, well, is that where the conspiracy starts, or does it go further back? What kind of led up to Jekyll Island starting the Federal Reserve System that is actually not federal, which is owned by the Council of the 13? Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Or people want to say the secret word like Illuminati, which just means the enlightened. Right? Oddly enough, the Illuminati started May 1st, 1776. So that year is the founding of, of America, as we know the Constitution of the United States, right? So we have 1913 Federal Reserve. We had 1912 Jekyll Island. And then we have the Titanic. Have you ever heard any of these theories before?
No.
Oh my gosh, this has been fun.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of J.P. Morgan?
Oh, yeah.
And so J.P. Morgan, he was the one that's kind of known to own, and he didn't necessarily built it personally, but, he funded the whole project of the Titanic, right?
Yeah.
There was two Titanics. There was the Olympus, and then there was the Titanic. So some of the rumors say that, well, because of insurance, the Olympus suffered catastrophic hull damage, from hitting another ship that they ended up fixing it, but he couldn't claim an insurance claim on it, that he ended up painting over, basically masking over Olympus and putting Titanic on, right? And so he ended up putting the Titanic out that's been, known to hit an iceberg out there, right? Well, what's interesting to know is like, okay, Federal Reserve, what does that have to do with the Titanic? When the Titanic sank?
I can't remember.
Yeah. And so that was around 1912. I think it was April 15th, 1912, Titanic sank. And that was right before the meeting at Jekyll Island, which happened in November, which is 6 months later. Maybe that's just a coincidence, but let's go back to what the evidence says. So there's a large group of men, right? And there was specifically a group of men that were against federalizing this system, monetary system, into a Federal Reserve. And all of those men just happened to be on the Titanic when what happened? It conveniently hit an iceberg in one of the most deepest parts of the world that we know today. Now, that could either be a coincidence or that could be something more nefarious. Those are for other details, but let's go about the evidence that we do know. That J.P. Morgan was supposed to be on his own ship with those other wealthy men rubbing shoulders, talking about a new monetary system, but now knowing that the only men that were against the Federal Reserve System ended up passing away in that Titanic when it sank. Does that, to you, is it a coincidence, or do you think there's something there?
There's no evidence, but it seems like there's something there.
Right.
Yeah.
The evidence we do know is men died that were against the Federal Reserve, and that's something everyone can just look up.
Yeah.
The Olympus being the Titanic, that can be a whole nother disagreement and a discussion there. Now, do we really know, or does it really matter? Not really. We just know a ship full of lots of innocent people that died as well. But including those men that were against the Federal Reserve, where 6 months later, they meet at Jekyll Island, and now we have the Federal Reserve monetary system. Does that make more sense now?
Yeah.
Kind of one leads to the next. So let's just kind of explain kind of the new system that we live in, because that's kind of what it's representing. If you look on the dollar bill, and I believe the dollar bill that we have today was the one that was created probably around the 1950s or so, somewhere in there. Have you ever heard of Bohemian Grove?
Nope.
Oh, this is all conspiracies. These are just rumors that I've heard before. But, Bohemian Grove, that was developed. The Bohemian Grove is basically a location outside of like Los Angeles in California, where the rich of the rich all are basically rubbing each other's shoulders, if that makes sense, and they're rubbing elbows with the richy rich. And it's not just the rich, it's the most powerful and influential people. That could be actors, that could be statesmen, that could be mayors, that could be congressmen, that could be political figures, that could be everyone in the spectrum as a whole meet there. Well, they ended up meeting there, and the dollar bill, if you notice on what it says on there, basically New World Order, Nova Secloria, which could just be, hey, this is the new system, and honestly, nothing nefarious has to be proposed there. We need some kind of barter and trade system. So I'm more of just opening up kind of what's the general consensus, right? And so now we've got the dollar bill as we know it today, right? Which stems back to 1913 in the Federal Reserve System when that was started. And if we say, well, if the government doesn't own the Federal Reserve, who does? You ever thought about that? So now you've got, obviously, the Council of the 13. Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
Have you ever heard of the Red Shield?
No.
Which is known as the Rothschilds. Before they were known as the Rothschilds, they were known as the Bowers. And before the Bowers and that whole families, it actually goes back down to the Italians
Okay.
which is, you probably heard of the Medici family,
Mm-mm.
Orsini families.
No.
The most powerful, influential, if we said what's on the top of the pyramid,
Yeah.
we just discussed
Okay.
it, right? And so the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the more, the Passeurs, the DuPonts, all of those names that we know more common, they are actually part of the Council of the 13. So we said, who owns the Federal Reserve? Well, it's the largest, let's call it 13 families in the world, including Queen of England.
Okay.
The money stems all the way back down to the original Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire, they say, collapsed, right? It collapsed into a church.
Okay.
And so that's where you get, where some of, you know, the origins of Christianity. So we won't spend too much time deep diving in there because we could stay there all day. But there's three axes that really run the world.
Okay.
You got spirituality, right? Everyone needs to know about Jesus and spirituality and the whole 9 yards. Well, who owns those keys? And those keys we would probably say would be God, right? At the same time, here on earth, that would be considered Vatican, right? So you got Vatican, which is a sovereign nation unto itself, right? Within Rome. Then you've got London of London, which is a sovereign nation, which is obviously in England. And then you've got a District of Columbia, which is a sovereign nation within the United States here. So you have this connection, this triangle.
Yeah.
Spirituality comes from here. The money comes out of London.
Yeah.
And where did America break away from? We broke away from England.
Yeah.
And yes, in the Revolutionary War, they said, hey, fine, you guys win, but we're leaving our banks. Well, isn't that convenient?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're starting up a business, you start up a business, you get the employees, and then you say, hey, I'm going to go sit back here, and then you just start paying me.
Yeah.
So that tax, if we want to call it the T-tax, never really left. That was an illusion. At the end of the day, the Brits left and left their banking system.
Yeah.
And that's where we pay tribute today.
Yeah.
So we're still paying our T-tax. So this whole conversation about addictions and about this cycle, this matrix, this system that we're part of, let's call it a T-tax.
Yeah.
Because in reality, the T-tax never left.
Yeah.
If anything, that T-tax is just getting bigger and tighter around our necks, which is pushing people to do things that they probably wouldn't naturally do.
Yeah.
Somebody that wants to work 40 hours a week, they're trying to work 80 just to make more money, they might start using drugs or any kind of substances to get through the day.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. I mean, what's your kind of feedback and your take on this kind of knowledge, I guess, if you want to call it?
It's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. And so at the end of the day, you know, knowledge doesn't really know good or evil.
Mm-hmm.
Truth is non-biased. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes we want to be ignorant to the truth just because it hurts.
Yeah.
So now knowing more about the system isn't saying that it's a bad system. It's just a matter of this is the bartering system that we have today. And if we call this system, spiritualism comes from Vatican, the money comes from London, and the military power comes from the District of Columbia. Because before Vatican was called Vatican, it was called Columbia. So Washington, D.C. became a district of Vatican or Columbia. And some say, like I said, this is for entertainment purposes only. What do we got sitting in front of New York?
The bull?
The Statue of Liberty.
Oh.
The bull is a whole another separate, which is goes into Saturn and Saturn worship about the bull, but in the golden calf, which we know about Moses, what happened there. So at the end of the day, we have the Statue of Liberty, right? That's holding the eternal fire.
Okay.
And some say, well, that's actually a masculine and feminine, or a Baphomet that's holding the eternal fire And the actual Baphomet that you'll see that has a goat face has the eternal fire like this, where the fire's over here. But that would be probably too obvious.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the real fun stuff comes into. So obviously, we're now based on this old Romanic empire that technically fell, but we're still in Roman law, right? And then you see the Statue of Liberty holding the Bible, which is King James Version. And it says it right on there. So you start thinking, you're like, okay, we would probably base it on, well, these are biblical principles and this is God's chosen land, which honestly, I'm not saying it's not. But what I'm trying to do is just dissect what's the base. Just like the Statue of Liberty is standing on a base. A base of what? Stars. So there's a reason why everything has a reference to stars. So when we think of a star, we think of, well, stars in the sky. Yeah. We think of stars also as stars on TV, which would be actors or normal people like you and I that maybe received a level of success. So we attribute everything to light, just like the Statue of Liberty, being that light unto all nations, right? Whether it's nefarious or not, that's just kind of what the symbology is behind it. So what's really fascinating, I think, about like learning more about the monetary system that we're in is like it's own religion, right?
Yeah.
So
people kill.
People kill over money.
Yeah.
What else do they kill over? Religion.
Yeah.
Right? So it's interesting to note that these are the three Axios powers that basically control the world that we live in today. They're kind of agreements of that, right? And so obviously there is more religions than just that one in Christianity. But at the same time, that is the basis of what American principles are built upon. And so going back into taxes and how taxes were collected and how taxes in a maritime law. Have you ever heard of a maritime law? So a maritime law is basically laws equal three things. L, land, air, water.
Okay.
Law. That's what law stands for. Well, the W stands for water in representing a maritime law. So that means ships that are out in sea, that's God's. Basically, they're in like no man's land. Yeah. And it's controlled by a maritime law, which are, think of it as international laws. Okay. Right? And so those international laws were then put into place to be as we have today, which are known as maritime laws. That's why the banks of a river and cash is liquid. Cash is flow. Yeah. And efficiencies. And everything relates back to, in a maritime law, back to water. Like we were talking about land, air, water. Okay. So it's fluid. You got to make sure your cash is fluid, your cash is liquid, your cash is constantly moving at the velocity of business, right? That's where you get, obviously, profit and everything else. Yeah. And so I'm seeing now that money is connected to this maritime law. We have to see why were they always, where were they collecting taxes when we had the tea taxes, right? They collected it where? At the dock. Mm-hmm. So anything that came in through water goes through a canal, and then that canal leads to a dock. So now we have the term in today's world would be considered a doctor. Mm-hmm. So when somebody's born of water, they go into the mother's stomach, mm-hmm. and then they're born of water. And the first one to receive them is a doctor, which receives the taxes. Mm. So this is where it gets interesting to know, okay, so us as a human, being part of this system, we all have our role to play. And let's say you're married, and you go where to get married? Courthouse. And when you get married to the courthouse, you're basically giving up everything for your rights, that to the government. And the government means governing the mind.
Mhm.
So when you get married, you now make a bond, you and your wife, but it also says the state of which you were in all caps, in big print.
Yeah.
You're basically making a bond with the government that I will take care of her, she'll take care of me, and with all three of us, if we have any children, they're going to be born into this new system that we keep referring to, that kind of system. So literally, when you are having a child at the hospital, you become a what?
Parent.
A parent. You're parenting with who? The government. So at the end of the day, that baby that is born, your child, is technically not yours. You're co-parenting it with the government. And so at that time, the baby comes out of the water and out of the canal with a doctor to receive them. First thing that they do is they prove that it's a live birth, right? And so they take the foot, just like they normally do, and they stamp the foot. Well, when you go to jail, what do you have to do? You have to give them your fingerprint, right?
Yep.
To know there's an identity of a live birth. Same thing, that you're a live person when you go to jail, representing your fictitious.
Wait, they stamp the foot?
They stamp the foot.
With what?
Ink.
Okay.
For identifying purposes.
Okay.
Not to say it's malicious or anything else, but it's just to basically prove that we got ourselves a baby over here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And they stamp what? What's that called when the baby comes out? It's a birth certificate, right?
Yep.
So they give you a certificate of what?
Birth.
Live.
Oh, okay.
Live birth.
Okay.
And with any live birth, we know that there's a monetary system that'll probably be attached to that, which is called a chattel. Okay. It's called a chattel system. So think of it as like cattle that's inside of like a field, and they're all corralled into what? A system. Well, you know what? You're going to eventually, all these cattle are going to grow up and be big cattle one day. And the whole purpose is to be big cattle so you can do what? Sell them on the market.
Yeah.
So that's where our stock market comes into place. And so isn't that kind of funny about the stock market coming into place with this new monetary system that is now supported by its own people? So the people now support the monetary system. Does that make sense a little bit better now?
Yeah.
So if we think about it, the doctor took out the baby, gave them a live birth certificate, which has a social security number, which is actually represented as a checking account number or a bond number. So now you've got a bond. Well, a bond means there's got to be some numbers, some money, monetary system attached to it.
Okay.
And so these are numbers that you can look online. Let's just give a general number right now. I think it's around $3 million. When a baby's born into the system, brings in $3 million. And how did they come up with $3 million? Well, it's the same reason why chattel or cattle would be sold, is when that cattle becomes, let's say, 1,000 pounds, it's worth $3,000.
Okay.
Well, in its lifetime, it's only ever going to be worth $3,000. So the average cattle might be around 1,000. There's some cattle that will make 2,000 pounds. There's some cattle that might only get 500 pounds, but they're generally sold on the system at around $1,000.
Yeah.
So the same thing that comes into the monetary system for a baby when it's born, the average American on a whole will make somewhere between $2.5 and $4 million in their whole lifetime.
Yeah.
So when that baby's born, they already give you that money, but it's held by a bond agency, which is called the IRS. And the IRS, as itself, is not owned by the federal government. Did you know that?
No.
That's a whole other thing where you got the Federal Reserve, you got the IRS, which is basically the collection agency of the arm of the Federal Reserve. And what they do is they're the bond agency that gives you what? A Social Security number. So now, when that Social Security now comes into the system, Imagine their coffers just went up $3 million.
Okay.
Then when you need a loan of any sort, where do you got to go?
Bank.
A bank.
Yeah.
And a bank works for who? Federal Reserve, right?
Yeah.
They don't actually work for the government.
Yeah.
The government might regulate
Yeah.
on some stipulations.
Yeah.
But where it comes to actually owning the system, they don't own that monetary system. They work side by side with them, but they technically, to our Constitution, they are two separate entities. So you can kind of see where Titanic, Jekyll Island, Federal Reserve, we have the IRS, which is the strong arm, which does the bidding for the Federal Reserve. Not to say it's bad, good, or indifferent. Just saying that's the system that we live in. So is it kind of making sense a little bit more on how this is a cycle? There's a system. There's multiple cogs into this wheel, and not just one big cog and one big wheel. There's all these different cogs and wheels that are constantly meshing together, and it's not just localized or nationalized. It's worldwide. Just like we said, the three axis powers that control everything in its own way. Not to say they control every little aspect, but when it comes into the whole of society that we know today.
So who owns the IRS?
Oh, well, if you think about it, who owns the Federal Reserve?
The 13.
Council of the 13.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the same thing. Who owns a city or a state? There's something bigger. So at the same time, they're the same masters. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Same masters. And so, America as a whole, it's amazing. It's an amazing where we came 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Almost horse and buggy.
Yep.
Model T car.
Yep.
First cars ran on basically water through electrolysis. To where they were like, you know what? We can't make money on a product that people can get for free.
Yeah.
Tesla was like, what are we doing here? JP Morgan and Westinghouse. Yeah. They said, if I can't put a meter on it, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feed the current barter and trade system we're in. And like I said, it's not that it's nefarious or whatever else. I mean, I'm a businessman, so I guess I got to put food on my table. Yeah. Would it be awesome to have a water powered car through electrolysis? Yeah, that'd be amazing. Do you really need to change your oil? Your exhaust would be technically bottled water. Yeah. Right? So there is going to be a transformation into this system. Whether it's good or bad or indifferent, I don't know. But as we were talking about systems in general, there's always expiration date put on them. So if we were to go into quick details about the Federal Reserve in 1913, that expiration date was set only for 100 years. Not to say they said at 100 years it's going to collapse, because after 100 years, what happened? What happened in 2008?
The Great Financial Recession.
Right.
Yeah, and then stimulus and debt.
The whole 9 yards. So they basically said, well, we got to put a Band-Aid on it. This system was designed to eventually collapse. Just like the Roman Empire wasn't going to last forever. Yeah. They transformed, not saying good, bad, or indifferent, they transformed more into what we know would be Vatican, basically. Yeah. And so at this point, a different foundation was built. This foundation literally collapsed. And there's a lot of symbology of collapsing stuff that just falls down. But with that said, we're in now this new world. Some people would say order. Is that good, bad, or different? I don't know. I know there's a shifting where before we had a horse and buggy, where we are today. Yeah. Some would say, well, maybe it was better in the horse and buggy, and some would say the opposite, right? But the world as a whole is moving to a new system. And, that new system we can either embrace or we can go against the grain, and some people will, will have that debate and that discussion. No matter what, it's happening. Yeah. I mean, your thoughts on the national deficits. Do you ever think $34 trillion will ever be paid off?
No, it's not sustainable at all.
not sustainable. I don't even think they can pay the interest.
Yeah, it's to that point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like pouring gas on a wildfire.
Yeah.
When you're trying to put the wildfire out with what? Gas.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you almost just have to let it take its course.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the world as you see it today, inflation and everything else is just putting more and more pressure back to what we were talking about, the people leading to substance abuse and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think there's reasons why they want to push people into those directions, that besides the money,
control,
besides the greed, besides the control.
Yeah.
There's an energy, almost as if there's an energy given off by the people that are stuck in that prison, for lack of a term, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're addicted to these substances, you're almost locked in your own prison.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that's going to be a next topic for another episode. But but this monetary system, we're getting into a new monetary system that's happening right now.
Yeah.
And to know where we're going, we need to know kind of where we came from,
mm-hmm.
and how money is produced in this monetary system through commodities.
Yeah.
Like you said before.
Yeah.
And commodities are considered chattel.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they get the name chattel. And other commodities are obviously lumber. We got to build homes.
Yeah.
That's why they called real estate, because it's the only thing that's real and tangible that actually holds value, except for commodities such as ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's why, I thought it fascinating when you said it's like humans are almost as if they're commodities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Where are we going then?
Well, let's leave that for next episode.
Okay.
This is Alden Antonucci with Extreme Podcast Power Hour, and just talking to my friend Josh here, Treasure, about money, commodities, and stay tuned for the next one. We're going to bring up some even more fun details about that. Have a good one.